Deep in the sealed archives of the Vatican lies a forbidden parchment from 1412. It speaks of a royal wedding soaked in blood, a monstrous beast wearing a crown, and a sacred Venetian mirror that exposed a terrifying lie. They told you werewolves were just myths. Here is the truth. History books remember the Duchy of Valascourt as a prosperous stronghold on the edge of the Holy Roman Empire, a land of impenetrable pine forests and jagged mountains. What the historians deliberately omit is the chilling reason why foreign armies never dared to march into those woods. The ruling family of Valascourt did not merely command armies, they commanded the night. They were afflicted or blessed, depending on who you asked by the Lupin grace. For centuries, the Dukes of Valascourt were rumored to possess the blood of the primeval wolf. By the time Duke Henrik ascended to power in the bitter winter of 1412, the bloodline was believed to be thinning. Henrik was a fearsome, towering man with eyes like crushed amber and a disposition as cold as the frost outside his castle walls. He bore the wolf's curse, shifting under the full moon into a creature of devastating power. But a Lycan ruler could not rule alone. To anchor his humanity and secure his lineage, ancient law dictated he must take a bride of equal, dormant blood, a true mate. To find her, the court relied on an artifact of terrifying legend, the Eye of San Marco. Brought back from the sack of Constantinople in 1204 by a disgraced crusader, the eye was a massive, 10-foot-tall mirror crafted from polished obsidian and framed in heavy, tarnished silver. It was hung at the terminus of the Great Hall. The mirror was said to reflect not the flesh, but the raw, unfiltered truth of a person's soul. To a human, it reflected a human. But to a creature of the blood, it reflected the majestic, terrifying aura of the wolf. As the blood moon of the winter solstice approached, the kingdom grew desperate. Without a true mate, Henrik's beast was becoming feral, his control slipping. The lords of the realm presented their daughters, parading them before the obsidian glass. One by one, the mirror reflected only ordinary, trembling young women. Then came Lady Eleanor of House Artois. Eleanor was a vision of aristocratic perfection. She possessed raven hair, porcelain skin, and a political cunning that could bring empires to their knees. When she stepped before the Eye of San Marco, a collective gasp echoed through the great hall. In the dark reflection of the glass, the faint, undeniable silhouette of a spectral wolf hovered behind her shoulders. The court erupted in joyous relief. Bishop Clement, the highest religious authority in Valascourt, declared it a miracle. Duke Henrik, though feeling a strange, hollow disconnect in his chest, accepted his duty. The wedding was set for the night of the blood moon, but Eleanor did not come to the fortress of Valascourt alone. In her vast retinue was her cousin, Lady Marguerite. If Eleanor was the sun, Marguerite was the dirt beneath the cobblestones. Born of a disgraced, exiled uncle, Marguerite was kept around merely as an unpaid servant, a whipping girl for Eleanor's cruel humors. Marguerite was quiet, keeping her head bowed, hiding her face behind a mop of unruly chestnut hair. She spent her days scrubbing the stone floors of the royal library and her nights shivering in the servants' quarters. Yet, there was something deeply unsettling about Marguerite. Dogs whined and bowed their heads when she walked past the kennels. The royal falcons refused to take flight if she was standing in the courtyard, and in the dark, her eyes caught the candlelight with a strange, luminescent gold. The first time Duke Henrik truly saw her, it was not in the Great Hall, but in the dimly lit catacombs of the royal archives. Henrik had sought refuge from the suffocating wedding preparations, seeking the cold silence of the stone. Instead, he found Marguerite, struggling to lift a massive crate of ancient census records. He moved to assist her, his massive hand brushing against hers. The moment their skin touched, a violent shockwave tore through Henrik's body. The beast beneath his skin, which had been restless and agonizingly irritable for months, suddenly went perfectly, terrifyingly still. He inhaled sharply. Beneath the scent of lye soap and old parchment, Henrik caught a scent that made his pupils dilate. Wild pine, fresh snowfall, and the intoxicating metallic tang of pure, undeniable dominance. Marguerite snatched her hand back, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide with a primal panic. She did not look at him like a servant looking at a duke. She looked at him like a predator assessing a rival. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she whispered, her voice a low, raspy velvet that sent a shiver down the duke's spine. Before he could speak, before he could demand to know why his pulse was hammering in his ears, she fled into the shadows. Henrik was left standing alone in the dark, staring at his trembling hand. He was betrothed to Eleanor, the woman the mirror had chosen, but his soul, and the monster residing within it, had just recognized its absolute equal in a servant girl. The fortress of Valascourt became a powder keg of whispered secrets and unseen betrayals. As the days bled closer to the blood moon, the tension between Henrik and Marguerite became a physical, electric force that neither could escape. Henrik found himself unconsciously tracking her movements. He would stand on the high balconies, his enhanced lichen vision cutting through the winter gloom, just to watch her cross the courtyard. He noticed how she moved with a silent, fluid grace, her footsteps making absolutely no sound on the gravel. He noticed how the castle guards instinctively stepped out of her way, completely unaware of why their primal instincts told them to yield. One evening, unable to resist the pull, Henrik cornered her in the royal gardens. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the world in white. "Who are you truly?" Henrik demanded, pinning her against the cold stone of the parapet. His voice was a low growl, his eyes flashing dangerous amber. "When you are near, the beast in me goes quiet. When you leave, it claws at my ribs. The mirror chose Eleanor, yet my blood screams for you." Marguerite looked up at him, the snow catching in her eyelashes. For the first time, she did not lower her gaze. "The mirror shows what it is told to show. Your grace," she breathed, her chest heaving against his armor. "But blood never lies." She reached up, her fingers daring to trace the harsh line of his jaw. The sheer audacity of a servant touching a duke should have resulted in her immediate execution. Instead, Henrik leaned into her touch, a low, rumbling purr vibrating in his chest. In that snow-swept garden, they shared a kiss that tasted of iron, desperation, and an ancient, feral magic. It was a seal of fate, but high above them, looking through the stained glass of her opulent chambers, Lady Eleanor saw everything. Eleanor's beautiful face twisted into a mask of sheer, unadulterated hatred. She turned away from the window and walked toward her vanity. Sitting on the velvet cloth was a small, lead-lined box. Inside lay her dark secret. Eleanor was no lichen. She possessed not a single drop of the ancient wolf blood. She was entirely, bitterly human. The image she had cast in the obsidian glass was a masterful, heretical forgery. For months, Eleanor had been employing the services of Master Guillaume, an exiled Parisian alchemist who dealt in the darkest of arts. Guillaume had harvested the spinal fluid and blood of a captured, feral werewolf from the Black Forest. Through agonizing nightly rituals, Eleanor had this tainted blood painted onto her spine, combined with crushed wolfsbane and silver dust to prevent the venom from killing her. The dark magic created a temporary spectral illusion, enough to fool the aging mirror and the desperate court. But the illusion was unstable. The alchemy was slowly poisoning her, turning the veins around her ribs a sickly, necrotic black. She had to secure the crown and the marriage before her body failed, before the lie unraveled. And now, this pathetic, orphaned cousin of hers threatened to ruin everything. Eleanor knew the truth about Marguerite, a truth that had been buried by House Artois for 2 decades. Marguerite was not a bastard. She was the sole surviving daughter of the true exiled Lichen King of the Northern Steppes. The wolf blood in Marguerite was not just present. It was royal. It was apex. She must not see the blood moon. Eleanor hissed to her captain of the guard, a brutal mercenary named Sir Roland. She handed him a heavy pouch of gold and a vial of liquid silver. "Put this in her water. Make it look like a winter sickness. If she is alive by the time the wedding feast begins, I will have your head." For 3 days, Marguerite suffered. The liquid silver, slipped into her evening broth, was catastrophic to her hidden lichen physiology. She lay sweating on her thin straw mattress, her veins burning as if filled with battery acid. Her body was forcibly rejecting the poison, trapping her in an agonizing state between human and wolf. Her fingernails elongated into sharp, black talons, gouging the stone walls of her cell. Her teeth sharpened, cutting her own lips until her chin was slick with blood. Henrik, consumed by the duties of the impending coronation, was kept entirely isolated by Eleanor's political maneuvering. He was told Marguerite had been sent back to the Artois estates due to a contagious fever. The lie tore at his sanity. His inner beast raged, thrashing against his ribs, howling for its missing mate. He grew violently unstable, snapping at his advisors, his eyes permanently locked in their amber, predatory state. On the evening of the blood moon, the night of the royal wedding, Marguerite lay on the floor of her locked cellar room, seemingly close to death. The silver had ravaged her, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the massive crimson orb of the blood moon began to crest over the jagged peaks of Valescourt, a change occurred. The moonlight pierced the high, barred window of her cell, casting a red glow over her trembling body. The royal lichen blood did not just heal, it conquered. Under the absolute power of the blood moon, the silver in her system was incinerated by the sheer, terrifying force of her awakening. Marguerite's spine arched with a sickening crack. The chains of her human fragility shattered. She opened her eyes. They were not human. They were the glowing, molten gold of a predator who had finally been unchained. The great hall of Valescourt was a breathtaking spectacle of medieval wealth and dangerous politics. 500 lords, ladies, and knights filled the cavernous room, wearing silks and heavy furs. Thousands of beeswax candles cast a flickering, golden light over the crowd. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, stood the Duke's throne, the altar, and the towering, ominous presence of the Eye of San Marco. Duke Henrik stood at the altar, draped in heavy ceremonial armor and a cape of black wolf fur. He looked magnificent, but his face was a mask of cold fury. His hands trembled slightly, the beast within him fighting a desperate, violent battle against the chains of his duty. He was about to bind his soul to a woman his instincts despised. Lady Eleanor walked down the aisle, a vision in crimson velvet and diamonds. She moved with practiced regality, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She had won. The crown was seconds away from resting upon her brow. Bishop Clement raised his golden staff, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "We gather under the grace of the blood moon," his voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings, "to bind Duke Henrik of Valescourt to his true mate. Let the bride step before the obsidian glass, so that the ancestors may witness her spirit, and let the ceremony be sealed." Eleanor took a breath, steeling herself. She had painted the alchemical mixture onto her skin just an hour prior. It burned agonizingly, but the illusion would hold long enough to say the vows. She stepped onto the dais and turned her back to the towering mirror. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the spectral wolf to appear in the reflection as it had before. But the alchemy was a fragile, man-made trick, and tonight, the moon outside was red. The ancient magic of the mirror, amplified by the celestial event, surged with an aggressive, blinding power. The Eye of San Marco did not show the wolf. Instead, a collective shriek of horror ripped through the great hall. In the reflection of the black glass, Eleanor's true soul was laid bare for the entire kingdom to see. The mirror showed a rotting, skeletal corpse draped in decaying rags. Black alchemical sludge oozed from the reflection's eyes and mouth. There was no wolf. There was only a vile, poisonous fraud. "Witchcraft!" someone screamed from the crowd. Henrik violently recoiled from her, his eyes blazing. "What is this?" he roared, his voice layered with the guttural snarl of the beast. "What have you done?" Eleanor panicked. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled into sheer hysteria. "It is a trick!" she shrieked, pointing wildly. "The mirror is cursed. I am your queen. I am—" Before she could finish her lie, the massive oak doors of the great hall exploded inward. Wood splintered, and iron hinges tore from the stone with a deafening crack. The guards stationed at the doors were thrown through the air like discarded rag dolls, crashing into the banquet tables. The hall descended into absolute, paralyzed silence. Standing in the ruined doorway was Marguerite. She was barefoot, her simple servant's dress torn and soaked in sweat and her own blood, but she did not look like a servant. She stood with a terrifying absolute authority that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Her chestnut hair whipped around her face, as if caught in an unseen storm. And her eyes, they burned like miniature suns, radiating a predatory dominance that forced the strongest knights in the room to involuntarily drop to their knees. "Arrest her!" Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking with terror. "She is the witch! She poisoned the mirror! Kill her!" Sir Roland and a dozen of Eleanor's mercenaries drew their swords and charged down the aisle toward Marguerite. Henrik lunged forward to intervene, to protect his mate, but he didn't need to. Marguerite didn't even flinch. As Sir Roland swung his broadsword toward her neck, Marguerite caught the razor-sharp steel with her bare hand. The blade bit deep into her palm, drawing a torrent of dark crimson blood. But Marguerite just smiled. It was a vicious, feral baring of teeth. The blood hitting the stone floor acted as the final catalyst. A shockwave of concussive force blasted outward from her body, extinguishing half the candles in the room. The sound of bones cracking and realigning echoed like gunshots. In a matter of seconds, right in front of 500 terrified nobles, Marguerite did not just shift into a wolf, she shifted into something out of ancient, forgotten nightmares. She became the Lichen Queen. Standing 8 feet tall on digitigrade legs, her form was a terrifying hybrid of woman and apex predator. Thick, midnight black fur covered her powerful musculature. Her claws were 6-inch scythes of obsidian bone. The sheer, radiating aura of her power was so overwhelming that the remaining mercenaries dropped their weapons, weeping in absolute terror. The Lichen Marguerite ripped the broadsword from Roland's grasp and backhanded him with such force that he flew across the room, crashing lifelessly into a stone pillar. She let out a roar, a sound so deep and earth-shattering that the stained glass windows of the great hall shattered inward, showering the room in colored diamonds. Slowly, heavily, she stalked down the center aisle. The nobles scrambled backward, climbing over tables to get out of her way, but she wasn't looking at them. Her glowing, golden eyes were locked entirely on Eleanor. Eleanor backed away, sobbing, scrambling up the steps of the dais until her back hit the cold glass of the mirror. "No, no, please," she begged. Marguerite stepped onto the dais, towering over the false queen. But then, Marguerite stopped. She didn't strike Eleanor down. Instead, the monstrous lichen tilted her head, indicating the giant mirror behind Eleanor. Everyone in the hall, including Duke Henrik, looked at the Eye of San Marco. In the reflection, Marguerite was not a monster. The obsidian glass stripped away the physical form and showed the soul. In the mirror, Marguerite was bathed in a blinding, ethereal white light. She wore a crown of pure, woven starlight, and behind her stood the towering, majestic spirits of the ancient Lichen Kings, bowing their heads in reverence to their returning heir. She was not just a true mate. She was the true sovereign. Duke Henrik, the most feared warlord in the Holy Roman Empire, fell to his knees. He bowed his head, baring his neck in absolute, instinctual submission to his queen. Seeing their duke kneel, the bishop dropped to his knees. Then the knights, then the lords and ladies. Like a wave of collapsing dominoes, the entire great hall submitted, leaving only Eleanor standing, trembling and utterly broken, before the terrifying glory of the true queen. The oppressive silence in the great hall was heavy enough to crush bone. 500 of the most powerful nobles in the Holy Roman Empire remained pressed to the cold stone floor, their foreheads bowed in absolute terror and reverence. At the center of the dais, the towering, nightmarish silhouette of Marguerite, the Lichen Queen, breathed in deep, rattling intakes of air that sounded like the drawing of a massive forge bellows. She did not immediately slaughter Eleanor. Instead, Marguerite's massive, fur-covered frame began to shudder. The terrifying, unnatural cracking of bone echoed through the vaulted ceilings once more as the beast began to recede. The sheer dark magic of her transformation dissolved into a thick, glowing mist that smelled of ozone and crushed pine needles. When the mist cleared, Marguerite stood in her human form once again, though she was forever changed. Her chestnut hair was wild and unkempt, framing a face that now possessed an ethereal, predatory beauty. Her eyes still glowed with that residual, molten gold. She stood completely naked before the court, yet she exuded such an overwhelming aura of terrifying majesty that not a single lord or knight dared to look upon her with anything but absolute awe. Duke Henrik rose from his knees. He did not hesitate. Tearing the heavy ceremonial cloak of black wolf fur from his own armored shoulders, he stepped up to the dais and wrapped it gently around her trembling shoulders. The moment the thick fur settled upon her, their eyes met. The true mate bond, violently suppressed by Eleanor's silver poison, snapped into place with the force of a falling guillotine. Henrik felt a physical shockwave detonate in his chest, a feeling of utter completeness that nearly drove him to his knees a second time. The beast within him, which had raged in a frenzied panic for days, suddenly let out a profound, spiritual purr of satisfaction. "She is ours," his wolf whispered. "She is the crown." Marguerite reached up, her fingers grazing the harsh line of Henrik's jaw. The touch was electric. "You were blind, my duke," she whispered. her voice carrying a raspy, ancient resonance that echoed to the farthest corners of the hall. "I was lost," Henrik replied, his voice thick with emotion, his amber eyes completely fixated on her. "But I see you now. I see my queen." Behind them, Eleanor let out a pathetic, suffocated sob. The alchemical illusion she had painted upon her skin was now reacting violently to the overwhelming surge of true lichen magic in the room. The false, spectral wolf in the mirror had dissolved into black sludge, and that same necrosis was now spreading rapidly across her flesh. Veins of sickly, necrotic black spiderwebbed up Eleanor's neck and across her porcelain cheeks. "Treason!" Bishop Clement's voice suddenly boomed, breaking the silence as he rose, his golden staff pointing accusingly at Eleanor. "High treason against the crown of Valascourt, against the sacred laws of the lycanthrope, and against God himself. She has consorted with dark alchemy." Eleanor scrambled backward, clutching her throat as the poison began to burn. "No! Have mercy! Marguerite, please, we share blood!" Marguerite turned to look down at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. The golden glow in Marguerite's eyes did not soften. There was no pity in the gaze of an apex predator looking at a dying parasite. "We share nothing," Marguerite said coldly. "Your blood is venom, Eleanor. The poison you fed me to steal my crown is now eating you alive from the inside out. You sought the power of the wolf, but you lack the strength to survive it." Marguerite looked to the surviving guards, who were still shaking in their armor. "Take her to the dungeons. Let the alchemist's rot consume her in the dark. She will never see the sun again." As Eleanor was dragged, screaming and thrashing from the great hall, the heavy oak doors, shattered and splintered by Marguerite's entrance, suddenly blew open completely, driven by a violent, unnatural winter gale. The nightmare was not over. Eleanor's desperate bid for the throne had involved more than just poison and mirrors. She had made a pact with the very entity that had supplied her the feral blood, Master Guillaume of the Black Forest. Guillaume was not merely a disgraced Parisian alchemist. He was a rogue lichen, a surviving warlord from the decimated packs of the Southern Alps, who had been exiled by Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg himself. Guillaume had used Eleanor's vanity to infiltrate the impenetrable fortress of Valascourt. By poisoning Marguerite and tricking Henrik, Guillaume had planned to swoop in during the chaotic aftermath of Eleanor's inevitable exposure, slay the weakened duke, and claim Valascourt's rich territories for his own feral pack. Through the shattered doorway, a terrifying howl erupted, a chorus of 50 feral, starving werewolves howling in unison. "The castle is breached!" a sentry screamed from the courtyard, his voice abruptly cut short by the sickening sound of tearing flesh. Henrik's demeanor transformed instantly. The romantic devotion in his eyes vanished, replaced by the calculating, brutal fury of the warlord of Valascourt. He drew his massive broadsword, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. "Bar the lower gates!" Henrik roared to his commanders, his voice amplified by the wolf within. "Protect the non-combatants! Lichen Guard, to the courtyard!" But as the knights scrambled to obey, Guillaume stepped through the ruined doorway of the great hall. He was a monstrous figure, half-shifted, with a human torso but a wolf's snout, jagged teeth, and cruel yellow eyes. Behind him stalked a dozen of his most vicious fighters, their muzzles already slick with the blood of Valascourt's outer sentries. "A touching reunion," Guillaume sneered, his voice wet and guttural. "But I fear the wedding feast is over. Your fortress belongs to the Black Forest now, Henrik. You are weak. Your bloodline is stale." Guillaume's yellow eyes shifted to Marguerite, who stood on the dais wrapped in Henrik's black fur cloak. He sneered, completely miscalculating the situation. "And what a pretty little prize you found. I will enjoy tearing the flesh from her bones once I have ripped out your throat." Henrik let out a deafening, earth-shaking roar, the muscles in his back expanding as he prepared to shift and tear Guillaume apart. But a hand gently rested on Henrik's armored shoulder. Marguerite stepped in front of her duke. She did not raise a weapon. She did not shout. She simply descended the steps of the dais, the black wolf fur trailing behind her on the stone floor, completely unbothered by the heavily armed, feral monsters standing before her. "You smell of rot and stolen blood, alchemist," Marguerite said, her voice dropping into that terrifying ancient register that made the mirror sing. "You claim this territory. You claim my mate. But you have forgotten the old laws." Guillaume laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The old laws are dead, girl. We are the new breed." Marguerite stopped 10 paces from Guillaume. She tilted her head, her chestnut hair falling over one shoulder. Her eyes flared to blinding, molten gold. "I am the old law," Marguerite whispered. She did not shift fully. Instead, she unleashed the pure, undiluted spiritual pressure of the northern steppe lichen kings. It was an invisible, crushing weight of absolute dominance. It hit Guillaume and his feral pack like a physical battering ram. The torches lining the great hall flickered wildly and blew out, plunging the room into shadows lit only by the crimson glow of the blood moon shining through the shattered stained glass. Guillaume's laughter choked in his throat. His knees buckled. The rogue warlord, who had terrorized the Black Forest for decades and evaded the armies of Emperor Sigismund, found himself gasping for air, unable to stand against the sheer, suffocating authority radiating from Marguerite's bloodline. Behind him, the dozen feral werewolves whining in terror, their tails tucked tightly between their legs. One by one, their claws retracted. They dropped to their bellies on the cold stone, whimpering and crawling forward to press their snouts against the floor in absolute primal surrender to the true queen. Guillaume fought it. He snarled, trying to raise his sword, trying to fight the overwhelming instinct of his own biology commanding him to submit to the apex predator in the room. "No," he gasped, blood dripping from his nose as the pressure ruptured the capillaries in his brain. "You are a myth. And you," Marguerite said softly, her eyes glowing in the dark, "are a trespasser." Marguerite moved with a speed that defied the laws of physics. She didn't draw a blade. She simply raised her right hand, her nails instantly elongating into 6-inch obsidian talons. In one fluid, brutal motion, she drove her hand directly through Guillaume's chest, shattering his ribs, and closed her fist around his treacherous heart. Guillaume gasped, his yellow eyes widening in shock and horror. "My territory," Marguerite whispered into his ear. "My court, my duke." She ripped her hand backward. Guillaume's massive body crumpled to the floor, instantly dead. Marguerite stood over his corpse, her arm coated in dark crimson blood, holding the glowing, still-beating heart of the rogue warlord. She turned her golden gaze toward the surviving feral wolves cowering on the floor. She tossed the heart at their feet. "Tell the Black Forest," Marguerite commanded, her voice ringing with unquestionable authority. "The Queen of the North sits upon the throne of Valascourt. Any who cross my borders will feed the crows." The feral wolves scrambled backward, terrified out of their minds, and fled into the winter night, howling their surrender to the blood moon. The Battle of Valascourt ended before it truly began. The absolute subjugation of the Black Forest ferals sent shockwaves throughout the hidden lichen network of Europe. Marguerite had achieved in 5 minutes what generations of heavily armored crusaders and inquisitors had failed to do. In the immediate aftermath, the Great Hall was a scene of stunned, breathless silence. The sheer brutality and majestic power Marguerite had displayed left no room for doubt, rebellion, or political maneuvering. The aristocracy of Valascourt, notoriously proud and difficult to control, had been broken and remade in a single night. Henrik walked toward her, his heavy armored boots crunching over the broken glass and splintered wood. He didn't look at the dead alchemist, nor did he look at the terrified nobles picking themselves up from the floor. He only had eyes for Marguerite. He stopped before her, taking her blood-soaked hand in his own. He did not care about the gore. He raised her knuckles to his lips and kissed them, sealing a vow older than the stone walls of the castle. "Bishop Clement," Henrik said, without turning his head. His voice was calm, but it brooked no argument. "The ceremony is not complete." The elderly bishop, trembling slightly but recognizing the divine and terrifying gravity of the moment, scrambled to his feet. He hurried back to the altar, retrieving his golden staff and the sacred binding cords woven from silver and silk. Under the shattered roof of the great hall, bathed in the crimson light of the blood moon and the ambient glow of the magical obsidian mirror, Duke Henrik of Valascourt and Marguerite of the Northern Steppes were wed. When they spoke their vows, it was not just a political alliance. It was the melding of two apex souls. When Henrik slid the heavy silver signet ring onto Marguerite's finger, the eye of San Marco behind them ignited with a brilliant, blinding flash of white light. The mirror recognized them. It recorded their union not just in glass, but in the very spiritual fabric of the land. The ensuing reign of Duke Henrik and Queen Marguerite became a terrifying, beautiful golden age for Valascourt. The true story of the Blood Moon wedding was, of course, quickly suppressed by the human powers of Europe. Whispers of a monstrous queen and an obsidian mirror reached the ears of Pope Martin V in Rome. Fearing a religious panic or a mass crusade that could destabilize the entire Holy Roman Empire, the Vatican dispatched envoys under the guise of an inquisition, led by the ruthless Cardinal Orsini. Orsini arrived at Vales Court 3 years after the wedding, demanding access to the archives and seeking to destroy the mirror, citing heresy. He brought with him a retinue of 500 heavily armed papal Swiss guards, expecting a siege. Instead, he was met by Marguerite. She greeted him at the gates not as a monster, but as a breathtakingly regal sovereign, dressed in elegant blue velvet, holding the hand of her young son, a boy whose eyes already shone with the terrifying gold of the ancient kings. Marguerite gave Orsini a private tour of the castle. No one knows exactly what she showed him in the deep, echoing catacombs of the fortress, or what terrifying truth she reflected back at him using a shard of the obsidian glass. What history does record is that Cardinal Orsini emerged from the castle 3 hours later, his face pale as death, trembling violently. He ordered his troops to immediately retreat to Rome. Upon his return, Orsini drafted a classified papal bull that completely legally recognized the autonomy of Vales Court, forever forbidding any inquisitor or crusader from crossing into their pine forests. The Vatican sealed the reports. The Eye of San Marco was eventually dismantled by Marguerite herself, its heavy obsidian glass carefully broken and distributed among the oldest lichen bloodlines of Europe, ensuring that no true sovereign could ever be hidden by dark alchemy again. As for Eleanor, her fate was as dark as her ambition. The alchemical necrosis ravaged her body, stripping her of the beauty she had prized above all else. She died mad in the deep dungeons of Vales Court, screaming at her own reflection in a puddle of dirty water, forever haunted by the phantom wolf she had tried to steal. Marguerite and Henrik ruled for over a century, their unnaturally long lichen lifespans allowing them to build an empire hidden in plain sight. They walked the halls of their fortress as elegant nobles by day, and ran through the snow-choked pine forests as terrifying, majestic beasts by night, completely and utterly devoted to one another. Their bloodline remains. If you travel to the deep, mountainous borders of what was once the Holy Roman Empire, you might still find locals who refuse to enter the woods after dark. They will tell you it is because of the wolves. But if you look closely at the architecture of the old ruins, and if you listen to the way the wind howls through the stone arches, you will realize they are not afraid of mere wolves. They are showing respect to the true queen, whose reign never truly ended. The legends of medieval Europe are built on forgotten truths, and the obsidian crown of Vales Court reminds us that no lie can outlast the raw, feral power of true blood. Did Marguerite's majestic dominance leave you breathless? If you loved this epic tale of royal betrayal, dark magic, and a true mate bond that defied death itself, hit that like button. Share this story with your fellow dark romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories of the supernatural.